Now, we are very honoured today to have Rachel Esson, the new National Librarian, with us here to open our symposium, which is just fantastic. So, without further ado, if we could welcome Rachel, everybody.
Kia tangi noa mai te kikihi pounamu. Ko manawa tū te manawa rahi, manawa tū te kaiwhakamaru. Kia raro iho I ona mata kia ringa o ōku mātua. Nō reira ko Rachel toko ingoa. Ko te pauhoaki o te puna mataranga o Aotearoa, no papa oia ahau. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I am delighted to be asked to open Tātou, Gather and Grow. And there are several reasons for that. The first reason is with my LIANZA hat on. This is exactly the type of event that LIANZA can enable and support. Two aligned special interest groups coming together, the Research SIG and TEL SIG, coming together to develop this fabulous program. Stimulating talks, opportunities for discussion. I thoroughly endorse this approach, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of it across LIANZA and across professional associations. I think this is a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. And I would like to sincerely thank the really dedicated committee members who did make this happen. I know it wasn't always easy, and of course with COVID lurking in the wings, how fabulous is it that we're actually here in person? We made it, it happened. But thank you to Annie, the co-chair with Natalie. I know a lot of work's gone into it. Amanda Cossum, Amy Jacob, Anith, Brenda Norton, Catherine, Claudia and Dr. Jo Simons. I know that you've put a lot of work into this, and here is the wonderful result. I'd also like to acknowledge the amazing LIANZA team. This is your job, but you do it so fabulously. You make it look easy. Thank you. Another person that we would like to acknowledge who played a key part in enabling this event to take place is Heather Lamond. Heather sadly passed away in March last year, but we remember Heather for her exceptional contribution to Tertiary Libraries and her contribution to LIANZA, particularly through the Research SIG. In her work as Assistant Librarian at Massey University, she made a huge positive impact on the distance library service. And she led information literacy, teaching and learning, and was an integral member of the Transforming Information Literacy Spaces to Support Student Learning Research project, which was a few years ago, but some of the results of that are being presented here at this symposium. Thank you, Heather. We miss you. The second reason that I'm really pleased to be here and to have this opportunity is this is my first occasion welcoming an event to Te Puna Mataranga o Aotearoa, and in my role as the National Librarian, and I'm pleased it's a supportive audience. So many familiar faces, it's really wonderful to see you. I'd also like to take this chance to thank our sponsors. We know that these are uncertain times, and so we really appreciate the financial support. So I'd like to thank Walters Kluwer, Springer Nature, Thomson Reuters, Britannica, Sage, and of course National Library for providing the venue. The third reason that I'm so pleased to be here to open Tātou, Gather and Grow is that I am a really strong advocate of evidence-based practice. This stems from my time at the Medical Library. I had the amazing opportunity to be involved with teaching evidence-based practice to fourth year medical students. I know I've got some of my colleagues in the audience here who still do that. And it was quite formative learning about evidence-based practice and how so much of it stems from asking the right question, asking a good question, and then being able to find the evidence to answer that question. And when I was thinking about this event and opening this, I went back and I had a little look at my MLIS project, which I did while I was at the medical library. And I looked at the abstract. Gosh, it's been a while. But anyway, this was my topic. Medical libraries very often base the decisions they make about library services on information gathered from surveys. Is the quality of the information obtained in this way sufficient to enable evidence-based practice? That was my worthy question. And so to answer that question, I did a systematic review. So I found a whole lot of studies and I analysed them. And using a systematic review approach wasn't very usual for library topics, so that in itself was a little bit of a challenge. But the thing that I found in my study was that although we write up a lot about in the literature about what we find through doing user surveys, we don't talk much about the validity of the survey tool. We don't often report what the response rate was. We don't often really analyse the quality of the information we get from that. And sometimes the response rate might only be 5%. And from that, you might get, answers about a particular question that only a fraction of that number of people have responded to, and then you're making decisions about your service based on that. So, it was interesting to go back and revisit that. I'm not sure much has changed. So the other thing that I want to say in this opening is that the work that you are doing here and the information that you are sharing here is so important. We often, I think, rely on informal networks to share the results of the research that we do, and I would strongly encourage you to look for opportunities to publish that research, to look for more formal ways of sharing it, and that way we grow that body of knowledge. And I think we are a really well-placed profession to be able to do that. We've got lots of knowledge and we can support each other to do that. So we have vehicles like the New Zealand Library Studies Journal. Let's use it. Let's promote and do more publishing there. So I know you're keen to get on with with your symposium, but I just want to leave you with one thought, and this was a quote that I came across recently from Bishop Desmond Tutu, and it's really stuck with me. It's a different context, but if you bear with me, I'll draw the theme out. And this was what he said: there comes a point where we need to just stop pulling people out of the river. We need to go upstream and find why they're falling in. And that's what I think you're doing here. You're going upstream to find the why. It's not easy. It takes time and it takes resource, but I believe it's worth it. So I wish you very successful upstream investigation while you are here for the next 2 days and beyond when you go back to your jobs. Thank you and have a wonderful symposium.
Kia ora koutou. It is lovely to be here. I was a little anxious about starting, about presenting here today, but when I look around, I see so many familiar faces that I know I'm among friends. Thank you for inviting me to speak at your conference, which looks very exciting. And I'd like to join in Rachel's congratulations to the people who organised this event. I know it's a big deal. It's a lot of work. I know from personal experience, so congratulations. So just a little bit of background about me. So just to give you some context for what I'm talking about. So before I was seduced to the dark side of university administration, I was a university lecturer, and my field of study is academic writing and peer-to-peer science writing. So not science communication, but scientists communicating with one another. And I taught a large compulsory first-year science course for over 20 years. And it was at this time that I developed a really strong relationship with the librarians at Massey. We would spend 5 weeks of our course working on information literacy because we understood the problems and challenges that our students faced. A few years ago, I was fortunate enough to receive a PhD scholarship to supervise a student on integrating information literacy into the curriculum, and was incredibly fortunate to persuade the amazing Angela Fikri to take on this role. And I remember that early in her project, we met with the Massey Librarians to talk about what enabled their work and what were problems for them in achieving the things that they wanted to do. And I remember listening to them talk about this, and I suddenly had a sort of brainwave, and I said, "It sounds like you're at the mercy of the academics." And they went, "That is exactly what we are." And it was kind of like a light bulb moment for me, and I think this little piece of information stored away in my mind. And I think it made me receptive to the prompt when it came to start researching in this field. So what I'd like to do today is introduce you a whistle-stop tour of our research. It really is a whistle-top. It was a 3-year project, 4 tertiary institutions, 6 schools, multiple disciplines within each of those institutions. So all I can do is give you the bare bones. I'm going to focus particularly on the sort of higher education side of this. And I should stress that this was very much a team research. We had a wonderful group of academics, librarians, school librarians and researchers all working together. And as well as this, we had our teachers and librarians within the institutions that we were working as co-researchers because we were using action research. But before I do that, I just want to step back into a slightly broader space and think about why the work we do has become so important in the last year. So what has happened? So you'll recognise this image from the Spinoff from the amazing Susie Wiles and Toby Morris. I cannot tell you how excited I am that they're coming to speak to you tomorrow. I am staying specially to hear them speak. They have played such a key role in addressing for the public the 2 crises that I think we have seen happening in 2020. So we tend at the moment to think of 2020 as the year of the pandemic. But I think we will look back and we will also say this was the year when the information crisis came fully into being in the Western world. So I remember being at a conference 8 years ago in Germany where they were talking about an information crisis on the basis of the sheer volume of information. But I think we've gone into a different space now. I'm sure you will agree. But we have to start by saying that misinformation and disinformation are nothing new. So political spin has been around as long as human beings have been around. You only have to read Aristotle or the Old Testament to see how information has been spun and used for the purposes of manipulation. We can look at George Orwell, Aldous Huxley were writing satirical novels about this in the 20th century, and all political systems, to some extent, have used political spin, sort of the angling of information, to achieve their own ends. But I think we can agree that something different has happened this year. So reading about one of the new Republican senators just strikes fear into my heart. Anti-science groups are jeopardizing the global recovery, and millions of people have refused to accept the factual evidence-based information about a major election. And it will take decades to interpret what has happened here. But I think we can attribute the prevalence of misinformation and disinformation to two things. One is that information is never neutral. It is always swimming in a host of connotations and significations. So there is always, and perceptions, so information is rarely, if ever, neutral. And also the human desire for power and influence. So power can be expressed in the conveying of information. I listened to my two teenage daughters after they came back from school, their first day of school, and thought information is power as they were conveying the gossip from one to the other. I think it is no exaggeration to say that disinformation, the deliberate spreading of false information about climate change, vaccination, human health, domestic terrorism, and election results, threatens the very future of democratic societies. It threatens the future of our children and the future of our entire planet. I think I have never been so proud to be a New Zealander as I have been this year, because I do think we seem largely to have escaped the worst of this. But the fact is that if this is happening for superpowers, it affects us. And I don't know about you, but I often feel I don't know what to do about this. How can I make a difference? And obviously we need our science communicators, our Susies and our Tobys. But if you're dealing with people who don't believe in science or scientists, and who are suspicious of facts, who don't know how to think critically and examine evidence, what then do you do? There is a Jewish proverb that says that solutions to problems lie not in today or tomorrow, but in the education of the next generations. And I believe that as educators, we have a role to play, which may be a long game, but is absolutely critical to addressing the information crisis. And there are a flurry of papers coming out at the moment around the significance of teaching information literacy. So this is one that's just come out, which is interesting. It talks about how teaching different kinds of literacy, what makes a difference in terms of addressing fake news, and they're talking about information literacy as the key. Another paper by Martins et al. 2020 discusses the need for sustained information literacy interventions, not just a one-off. And I can't help thinking that the universities have forever been talking about themselves as the critic and conscience of society. And I think it's time for them now to put their money where their mouths are. And you and I, we are the information literacy specialists in our institutions. We are vital to the next generation of digitally literate adults who need the skills to engage critically in a digital world. And I think that as we live in this information crisis, I think that perhaps for the first time we have a real mandate to step forward and make a difference, to be no longer on the margins of education, but central to it. So drawing on the research, our research, I'm hoping today to help us think about what we can do and how. So just to start our whistle-stop tour, just a little about our research. It was a 3-year TLRI project funded by the TLRI to investigate information literacy spaces. And it had emerged out of another 2-year project which had been about academic literacy but became about information literacy. And we had 2 key aspects to our study: conducting a baseline study of information literacy in the senior secondary school and the first year of higher education, including the place of the library. And then the second aspect was teacher-librarian partnerships to integrate information literacy in the curriculum, which were based on a truly collaborative model, and more on that shortly. So just briefly, Our aim was to improve students' information literacy competencies within the discipline. So we were conceptualizing information literacy as an aspect of the curriculum, an aspect of the discipline, not an addition. So we wanted to see how they're currently placed. We wanted to look at systemic and attitudinal barriers to enablers of collaboration in the IL space and facilitate these collaborative partnerships. This is what it looked like. So this is a visual representation of what we were trying to do. So the first year was our baseline study with our surveys, looking at documents. Second year was partnerships. And our intention had been to move into a third year, which was progressions, information literacy progressions. As it turned out, we needed 2 years to really bed in our partnerships. So the progressions work is still ongoing. We hope to nail that this year. In terms of a model of information literacy, the model that we used was, again, developed by Angela. And it was what we're calling the Fikri model of information literacy, which is developed from Secker and Koonen's 2013 model. So as you can see, it puts information literacy firmly in the centre of literacies. And as an academic literacy specialist, I have to tell you, at first, I argued against this. So I was sceptical. I'd always seen information literacy as an aspect of academic literacy, but to put it in the centre required me to rethink. But I think if we put information literacy here, it does actually make sense because all other literacies depend on this. And I also think that it helped by putting information literacy in the centre, we may see its relevance to the current information literacy crisis. We also worked with a particular model of teacher-librarian partnerships to integrate information literacy into the curriculum. You'll recognise this model, I think, from Montiel overall. So it's here. And I realise it's a lot to read, but basically what we were aiming to do was to move people from the left as far to the right as we could. So away from siloed or cooperative and more towards a truly shared approach to the curriculum and to assessment. We also developed a couple of new tools. So this is a new framework that we developed, Angela developed with the Maori librarians at Massey, and she's giving a workshop on that today. So I'm not going to talk about it now, but I encourage you all to go. It's really exciting, and also. We developed an information literacy rubric. So this, again, was an initiative of Angela's, which was developed by the team over time. And these are tools that we would be very happy to share with you if you're interested. So that was how we approached, this was the kind of basis of the study. We then engaged with the baseline study and then with developing these collaborative partnerships. So let me talk about our findings. I know you're not school librarians, but my heart just went with school librarians, I'm afraid. So I have one slide about the school librarians, because I think we need to understand something about the plight that they're in. So we did 4 surveys as part of the study, 2 for schools and 2 for higher education. The schools had a teacher survey and a librarian survey, and then we did the same in higher education. So this is what we found. A cry for help is what I called the librarian survey when I read through the qualitative results. One librarian had written a 1,200-word essay in the qualitative section. Many people wrote extensively. So few schools have whole of school information literacy policies and practices which are fully implemented. far from being the heart of the school, which all the rhetoric says about school librarians, they are on the absolute edges. There is no mandate in schools for New Zealand schools to have a library. And I couldn't believe this, the librarians are paid out of the operating budget rather than staffing budget. And as one of our librarians said, that means that their salary is in competition with the price of toilet paper. We did some investigation of teacher attitudes to the library, and we found that having a well-resourced library was not sufficient to adjust teacher perceptions of the role of the library, and that librarians in schools are consistently sidelined, role-restricted, and systematically excluded from decision-making. So we heard stories of librarians who couldn't go to any meetings because the meetings were held at lunchtime, or they were held after school when their contract had finished. So they were actively discouraged from attending meetings. So I just wanted you to be aware of this, because I think it says so much about the information literacy skills of our students when they come into higher education, if the librarians have been so sidelined. I could talk a lot as well about how NCEA engages with information literacy, but no time for that today. Some heroic librarians going to extraordinary lengths. I was just in awe of these people. What we found that information literacy rhetoric in higher education does not always match practice. So this was, I come to that conclusion based on a couple of things, looking at documents for higher education, and also looking at the surveys again. So most institutions of higher education do not have an information literacy policy. I'm sure that's no surprise to you. They most commonly do not include information literacy in their graduate attributes. And here's the thing, I think that the role of librarians remains constrained in terms of their capacity and how they're being utilised. Now, I don't think this is as extreme as it is in schools, but I still think, based on the survey, which showed us how limited academics' awareness was of what the library could do, I still think we are not utilising a wonderful resource. I just wanted to point out this finding from our survey as well. So this is from the survey which looks at how important librarians think different information literacy skills are and how much they think they are prioritised by the institution. And the one that really interested me was evaluating information. So the librarians consider that 97% important to life success, but they feel that their institution values it only 65%. And that is a key difference. And it would be interesting to do some more research around this. We didn't set out to assess students' information literacy skills. We knew from reading the literature that there were limitations to students' information literacy skills as they come into higher education. The Stanford History Group describes US college students' IL skills as bleak. But as part of our study, go back to the information literacy rubric, we used the information literacy rubric primarily as a teaching tool for teachers. So to assess how students thought about information literacy so that it could be then used by the teachers to integrate the appropriate skills. But what it turned out was it was an amazing research tool because it gave us all this information about how students think about their information literacy skills. The results obviously far too great to go into, but what intrigued me most was this discrepancies between what students thought they knew or could do and how other items in the list revealed something different. So, over 90%, so these are the results from a first-year management course, a university management course. So, over 90% of students stated that they often or always change their search strategy if Google results are inadequate. But 45% limited or very limited search skills using Google. Over 58% had never used Google Scholar or Google Books. 59% don't know or have never used any other databases. 42% of students never or rarely question who wrote a piece of information. 33% question whether something they read is true and accurate. And 38% have limited capacity to judge whether information is good quality. Isn't that scary? So what we're seeing, I mean, the question is, if they say that they're changing their search strategies, how could they with those kind of results? They didn't have the tools to do that. The other one that came up was around plagiarism. So just to give you something around this, 85% were confident that they knew what plagiarism was, but 34% don't or only sometimes record where they're getting information from. 48% don't know how to format a reference list. 43% don't know what an in-text citation is. And 28% don't acknowledge sources unless their teacher tells them to. So really interesting information coming out about this. The next slide, I'm going back to one that I gave you earlier because I just want to talk about the results that we had here. Sorry, that's the next slide, sorry. So I want to think about what we're going to do, and I think that one of the places we might start is by changing the rhetoric about what the library is and the metaphors that we're using to describe it. So, as I say, my biggest bugbear is the library is the heart of the school or the heart of the institution. Let's call that out for the lie that it is. I think I don't have an alternative. We either need to make it true or we need to come up with something else. But I think we need to start pushing back on that and asking, when decisions are being made, whether they are consistent with that approach. The other one I would ask us to think about is the library as the room of requirement. Sengo, I know you like this one. The trouble with the room of requirement is there's this magical place that just produces whatever you want. And there's no expertise or skill or initiative or anything in that. It's just a passive thing that does what you want. And I actually think we're better than that. I think we have initiative. I think we have capacity that academics lack sometimes. So why aren't we talking about that? Is there a more active, more provocative image that we could use rather than the room of requirement? It is a nice idea, but I just think it doesn't quite capture something. One of the things that came out in the study, we looked at the difference between low library involvement teachers and high library involvement teachers. And we looked at the qualitative findings, how they talked about their engagement. And the interesting thing was this: those who were low involvement talked about the library, and those who were high involvement talked about the librarian. That was such an interesting finding for us. And so I think we need to find a way of promoting the librarian and the librarians. And again, it gets us away from the idea of the library as the room of requirement. The library is pulsating with librarians, skilled information literacy experts. And so we need to start talking that way. And I've had 30 years of a career trying to do this, but I think we need to somehow get away from the idea that information literacy or literacy instruction is a deficit model, that it is remedial activity. And I hope you have more ideas about how we can get that through to academics, because as I say, I've been trying. But if we can say that information literacy and literacy development is part of all that we teach, right up to the highest levels. I mean, I work with PhD students on their writing skills. I'm not teaching them how to write paragraphs and sentences. I'm teaching them the complex rhetoric of their discipline. So I wonder if we stop talking about academic literacy or literacy, we start talking about rhetoric and the role of information literacy as a key component of rhetoric. Because I do think that when people say, my students can't write, they think they're saying they can't write in sentences, but what they actually mean is they don't know how to write like a geographer or a chemist or whatever it might be. And some, even recently I gave a presentation about academic literacy, and this academic said, I just want my students to write in good, straightforward, good prose. That's not true. He wants them to write in a particular style. He wants them to use a particular genre. And he is unaware of the complexities of what he's asking for. How do we get that through to academics? And information literacy is part of that. It is developmental, and we need to stress that. This is the chart that I said we were going back to. The interesting thing, so this is about our librarian teacher partnerships. And I noticed a specific difference between how this worked in the schools and how this worked in the polys and the universities. 3 different modes in our research. May not be always the case, but this is how it happened in our research. In the schools, we saw a massive shift to the right. So our school librarians were mainly over at point 1, totally siloed, not integrated. And they moved to point 3 or 4, which was amazing, moving them, and it was a game changer for them. It was a little different in our universities and our polytechnic work. So the polytechnic work was really driven by Catherine here. And what we saw, I think, was a shift, but it probably went from point 2 to point 3 or 4. Because they were not the librarians were not quite as siloed as the school librarians. But the interesting thing was in the universities, and I don't think made much of a shift at all. I think we might have moved slightly from 2 to 3, but it was still teacher-driven. And this is bothering me and trying to work out why this is the case. I think part of it is the siloing of course development, the academic freedom idea that the academic can design the course however they want, and which I hope is changing. As a director of teaching and learning, I hope that's changing. And also the slow academic approval processes. So it was really hard for us, for example, to get people to change assessment because it took such a long time. But there was one university project that really did encourage me and was quite different to anything else. And I'd actually started before we became involved through our research. And that was a program level nursing program within a university. And they took a whole of program approach, integrating the librarians, the learning designers, web designers, and all sorts of people working together. And that's where I think we need to go, is moving away from personal relationships and more towards the strategic, program level, discipline level approach. So, I think we need to think how to work more strategically. So one of the things that came out in the surveys was how much the librarians' influence depended on their personal and professional relationships with individual staff. And with staff churn and, all sorts of things could get in the way of that. And so we have to learn to think differently. I'm sure you're already thinking this way, and my apologies if I am preaching to the choir. And you will have other ways. I'd love us to have a discussion about what thinking strategically might look like. But we need to identify key players. I think without a champion at senior level, we are unlikely to get traction of changing the positioning of the librarians, not the library, within the institution. So I think you need a champion, you need academics on board who can make the kind that can make a difference. You need programs, disciplines, degree level, qualification level impact. And the question is, how do we get it? So getting those key players on board, I think, is important. By the way, the scribbling on the side was my team trying to think strategically. So just if you're wondering about what that is. I think we need to get information literacy included in graduate attributes. So in our college, based on my research, we have now integrated information literacy into our teaching and learning strategy as one of the key attributes that we want from our students. And I am about to start the really painful process of curriculum mapping information literacy across all the programs. Academics are quailing as I come along. So we need to get involved with this curriculum planning at discipline level, information literacy policy. And how do we do this? As I say, I really do want us to think more about this, but I think we need to have more courage. Like, the librarians may be represented on committees, but so often we are concerned about protecting our resources and our buildings and the little bit of influence that we have, that I think we can be cautious about claiming our expertise as curriculum people who have got things to contribute at the planning, assessment, curriculum level. We've got to start speaking about that more in those spaces. And I think we need a shared model of information literacy that we can talk about across a whole institution or a whole program. So rather than just attributes here and ideas here, and let's just see if we can tweak something in here, we need a model. I would love us to have a model that we can use across schools and across higher education so that we can be sharing the same language when we talk about information literacy. Obviously, I think that our framework should be the one that is, but you find out about that later today. So that's our research, and this is where we're going next. So we are really thinking about how to develop information literacy strategy across sectors. We are wondering who we need to get together in a room to talk about this and whether we have the clout to make it happen. We'd love you to be a part of this if you're interested. We are developing our information literacy progressions. So there are information literacy progressions in schools that go up to, Senga, what does it go up to? Do you know? Year 10. What I would love to see is information literacy progressions that go 11 to 12, years 11 to 12, and then 13 to the first year of higher education. So that we've got those 2 year, we see those 2 years, year 13, first year higher education, as a single experience of information literacy. We are writing a book with NZCR Press, and if I could just get myself together and write the final chapter, we would have it to the publisher by now. And I just wanted to mention a project that I'm really interested in, which is that I'm interested in doing, applying for funding for a project that looks at libraries in terms of what are they. So both a public library, a higher education library, and a school library, where we do a 24-hour ethnography of what happens in the library on that day. Who's there? Why are they there? What are they doing? And what is the place of this library in the community that it is a part of? So again, if that's something that interests you, have a chat with me. So thank you for listening. We are happy to share any of the tools that we've developed with you. I firmly believe that we have an important and strategic role to play in addressing the information literacy crisis. It is a long game, but we are used to playing the long game, right? And I think if we can start to work together more strategically, If we move away, I mean, the personal relationships are important, but we will have a longer, deeper impact if we can work at the strategic level. So, thank you.
Wow, that was amazing. Lisa probably knows I've been interviewed by Lisa before too, because I used to be a school librarian, so all of that just resonated so well with me. Absolutely. You're a support staff person, you're in the library, but the library is often repurposed for so many other things, and it's really hard to make that impact. And then I was in a Polytech library too, so part of the TLRI project when I was at Welltech, and totally came up there was a lot of issues there too. And now I'm in a university library, so all of that is just so dear to my heart in terms of being an impactful librarian and making the most of it and trying to get that embedded information literacy is so key. So I just found that, just loved everything you had to say there. We have got a few minutes for questions, guys, so we would love to be able to have those for Lisa. Those in the committee who are maybe able to grab a microphone will have to use those so that people can ask Lisa questions. I think we should take advantage of this. I'm sure she said a lot of things there that have made you go, right, I've got a burning question about that. And then, we will be able to obviously have morning tea for more discussion. But if you do have a question, if you could raise your hand and say we've got the committee being able to pass you a microphone. I hope that's not intimidating, but again, it would be great to continue the discussion. Who's going to go first? Someone has to. Oh, perfect. Thank you. And we've got...
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
I'm Anne Goulding. I'm from the Information Studies programme at Victoria, just across the road there. So I really liked your point about promoting the librarian rather than the library. But you touched on this a little bit yourself, but I wonder about some of the risks of that in terms of resourcing, given that we are in such uncertain times and, the universities are looking to make cuts left, right and centre because of the decline in international students. So is there, as I say, a little bit of a risk there, do you think?
I actually think there's more of an opportunity. So I understand that, and I understand how everybody is kind of not putting their heads above the parapet and hoping nobody will notice them. But I think actually that if we could show the true capacity of the librarians in terms of curriculum development and so on, you are more likely to protect the resources that you have, because you are more important than just being a search. What worries me in schools is that we've got schools where they are getting rid of the library because they're going to have information hubs where, without the expertise of a skilled librarian, they're just languishing. We know students don't have the search skills. So I think if we can promote more the level of expertise held by librarians, you are protecting a resource because it's more valuable. That's what I hope anyway.
Thank you. My name is Kingsley. Just following on Anne's question, do you think the librarian's personality in this context should play a key role, in the ability to project themselves and what they can do in this context of information literacy?
That's an interesting question. I suppose I might put it slightly differently, not in terms of personality, but in terms of training. That training to be a librarian doesn't necessarily involve teaching experience, teacher training. And so putting a librarian in front of a classroom might be a challenge for some people who are not very confident or who are not out there, because they haven't had the training to be a teacher. So, sorry.
Why I said personality is because sometimes there's a character of projecting what you do. For instance, you said the librarians were languishing, right?
Yeah.
Nobody is noticing them, but someone might sort of sell the idea to some people at some point. Does personality play a part in that?
Ah, interesting. I think that's a really interesting question, because I think often as librarians there's a danger of being so used to being sidelined that it feels more risky to speak up. Though I have to say the librarians I know are as noisy as anybody else, not looking anywhere in particular. I think there is a risk and a challenge in speaking up for any personality type. And I think we do it better if we work together and if we plan ahead. So I think suddenly standing up in the University Teaching and Learning Committee and saying, no, we must rise up in a body, and, the library, this, that, and the other is not a good idea. But careful planning is always sensible, and drawing on evidence. And there's so much literature about what the library could be doing. How do we get the academics to read it? And that was the other thing. I thought Rachel was stressing the importance of publishing, and she talked about a library journal. I think that is really important. But even more important is that you are publishing in education journals that teachers might actually read. Because otherwise you are preaching to the choir. So we've tried to publish not in library journals, but in education journals. Sorry, I went on a deviation there. But I think it is about planning and thinking ahead, working out how best to do this. I hope that helps. Yes.
Hi, my name is Anais. I actually did a project on TLRI, and my project was going from face-to-face workshops to online learning objects. And personally, I really like the face-to-face aspect, so I found it a bit challenging moving completely online. And my question is, what are your thoughts on online learning? How are ways that we can make that as better, the same as face-to-face, keep that relationship with the students if it's online?
That is a really big question. Oh my.
Sorry. Yeah, no, it is. Yeah.
I have to say I'm with you on the face-to-face thing. One of my favourite lines from Parker Palmer is, that teaching is on the edge of the public and professional. Of the personal and the professional, and that it's a relationship, and it's harder to establish that online. One of the very best teachers that I work with at Massey, who teaches a big core first-year course, one of the best teachers I know, brilliant website, brilliant engagement strategy. Their retention rate still dropped for the internal class when we moved online. I think the key danger of online learning is that you lose the idea that you're working with people and that you've got that one-to-one happening, which you have in a classroom. And so whatever we do has to keep, for the teacher or whoever is teaching, that personal relationship going. And I think that's actually one of the great things that the pandemic has done. Sounds terrible to say that, but, teachers have told me they've seen their students not just in the classroom as a random person, but they've seen their bedrooms where they're working, or, they've seen the inequalities between those who've got perfect internet connection and those who are, sitting on the edge of the dining room table with 10 other students having to pay for a certain amount. They've become more aware of their students as people in those sort of Zoom sessions. So I think there are capabilities as long as we keep that focus on the individual. Sorry.
Thank you.
That was fantastic. I enjoyed your session. My name is Dipti Vora. I am from the Unitech Institute of Technology. And it's more like a statement. Do you think that many of the librarians, they start on a premise of always proving their relevance, be it to the institute or to the academics? Do you think that we need to change our mindset and go and say, hey, we are relevant and this is what we can do for you, rather than, coming from a secondary position. Would that change? Because I feel that we're constantly trying to have that a foot in the door, rather than saying, hey, you need us more than we need you, something like that.
I absolutely think that. I think the default setting is, what can I do for you? And actually, you know better what you could do for them. And so I think we need to be more active, more proactive in that way. Absolutely. I think it's key. Yeah.
Valerie Greenmoss from North Tech. I understand what you're saying about relationships, and I've found that my relationship with particular members of staff in different departments has been really key in developing, getting me into that and working in their curriculum and things like that. So in some areas I've been doing quite well. And that falls over when they leave, or if the staff member involved leaves, the librarian leaves. So I think my experience in the wider world of commerce and things as well is that you really need to have a structure that is independent of the people. So that's where the policy comes in.
Yeah, absolutely.
And these things do work together, because you can't really, you've got to develop the relationships and encourage people to engage in the policies and things, and so you do need the strong drivers. But so I'm very aware that some of my relationships with different departments entirely fell over when that staff member left.
Absolutely, that's what we saw too. Yeah.
Hi, Lisa. It's Mojgan from Massey, Palmerston North as well. I've been following your research in the past 3 years. I was really keen to hear the results, and thank you for the presentation. I think mine is mainly just a couple of comments from my own personal experience in response to the other questions, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I can share. Regarding the personality that you mentioned, I do agree with that, but also I think the support of the association is really important. People get empowered if they know that other people are behind them. And so having something like LIANZA and also having the network with other people will empower us to stand up and say something and then get to the strategy part and sort of go as a team, as you mentioned. And with the online teaching, I personally like the face-to-face as well, so I found it really challenging. But if I can see the lecturer, even with a recorded message, or the librarian, I seem to get more engaged rather than just having the PowerPoints and the voice behind it.
Absolutely.
So I think that could be another way of having a few minutes sort of engagement face-to-face, who's talking behind it, and then maybe follow-up sort of sessions and questions popping up, or chat room or something could also help with that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Holly. My question is about the high turnover of library assistants and often frontline staff. And library assistants might not necessarily have a library background. They may come from anywhere, so degrees of information literacy can vary depending on what a person knows. Should we be having in-house training as well to support ourselves and our staff?
Absolutely. And I mean, it would be, I don't know the level of PD that librarians engage with, but it would seem to me a critical element for all members of staff. I think it's interesting in universities that we have an ambivalent attitude to professional development. So I floated the idea that in our college we should make it compulsory that all academic staff have 3 hours of professional development and teaching and learning every year. It was everybody had hysterics. You wouldn't, if you were a nurse, you would expect to have regular professional development, wouldn't you? I mean, it would be essential. So I do think we tend to have an ambivalent attitude to professional development, but yeah, absolutely. And it would be so interesting as well to do PD that is related to the research, some really interesting research coming out at the moment in response to the pandemic. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Alison. I work in a school library, and I really resonate with a lot of pretty much everything you said. We've had a situation where we used to do digital literacy in school in our classes and teach it in sort of year 9 and 10, and so I've got a couple of, and we've had issues with one of the members of the new head of department in a social studies. So now our digital literacy program has been shunted to tutor time and to be delivered by teachers, not by us. So I've got a couple of questions. One, how did you deal with those types of issues? And secondly, what is the other issue about trying to get 11, 12 and 13 who really do need these skills because they're all pretty hopeless at it and just don't engage at all when you put programs on and things like that. So how can we as library staff in schools try and sort of push this forward? Did you have any, because I noticed on your chart you said that you went to the collaborative quite well in schools.
We did.
So
we
it's
did.
our school's quite supportive, but I think it's, we're still support staff. We just more like the technicians than anything else, which is a real problem.
The key to our success was what I was saying, that actually wasn't what I was thinking. I was thinking of Ken. That Ken literally went into schools, banged principals' heads together and made things happen, but not everybody can have a Ken. Senga is likely to have more ideas about this than I do, so I could speculate, but I actually think Senga is the person with the ideas here, so to wave, go and talk to Senga, definitely. Thank you.
And I would just add, I'll get to the microphone, there's such a role for Open Poly, for VUW, and for LIANZA, as well as individual organisations in supporting staff development.
Thank you, Anna. Next, we have our keynote speakers who really need no introduction from me. What I will say is their way of communicating has been in complex ideas, has been invaluable in making the science of COVID-19 clear and understandable here and around the world. Please join me in welcoming Susie Wiles and Toby Morris.
Do you want some water?
Hi everyone. Yes.
Kia ora.
Kia ora koutou. Yeah, my name's Toby Morris. I'm a cartoonist and an illustrator and creative director at the Spinoff.
And I'm Susie Wiles. I'm a scientist. And so, I'm going to put a timer on so that we don't run over. We're just going to show some slides that basically sort of tells our story, really. So because everyone's always asking, how did it start? What's your creative process, which Toby can talk about. Show you a few of the things that we've done. I guess some reflections on it. We'll just see how we go until the buzzer rings, and then hopefully there'll be time for questions, if that's okay. So I guess I start the story so if you didn't know me before COVID, I'm a microbiologist. I'm an associate professor at the University of Auckland, and I've had a really long-standing interest in science communication. And that's because I really firmly believe as a scientist that my science doesn't end with the publication of a journal article. It ends when everybody who needs to know about your science knows that science, and that's usually not people who are subscribers of journals and stuff. So it means that over the years I've done a lot of communication of my science, but also actually of kind of other science and microbiology in general. So what has happened over a 10-year period is that if a microbiology story breaks in the news or there's any questions that journalists have about microbiology, they usually call me up. And so in mid-January, my phone started ringing. People were like, what's this thing coming out of China? And so I started answering journalist calls, and Toby Manhire, who's one of the editors at the Spinoff, said, Susie, do some writing for us at the Spinoff. So I started writing, and writing. And then at some point, let's see if I can actually operate this. At some point, I saw this graphic on Twitter. And it's the concept of flatten the curve, and it seemed like a really important concept to get across. But what really struck me, so I wanted to write about it for the Spinoff, but what really struck me about this graphic is that it's awful. And it's quite, I mean, apologies to Drew who came up with it, but it doesn't really reflect what flatten the curve actually means or how we can all be part of it. So I sent a message to Toby Manhire to say, I'm going to write about this thing, and it would be really awesome if we could kind of redo this graphic. Do you think Toby Morris would be interested? And the reason I asked about Toby was because I've really long admired his work. I love how his cartoons really make you feel like you're invested in it. You understand what they're about. He just like puts the people into it. And I knew he also was really, connected to the Spinoff, and so I was like, maybe, just maybe, he would agree to do something with me. And then within an hour, we were on the phone to each other. I'd sent him these things, and we started chatting.
Yeah. So I get a call from Toby, and he says, "Do you want to work with Susie?" And of course, by that stage, this is early March. It's been, everybody probably remembers that sense of kind of. The seriousness of the situation daily was becoming more obvious, and I'd been reading everything that Susie had been writing, so of course I said yes, and like Susie says, about an hour later we were talking on the phone.
So we'd never met at that stage. We didn't go on to meet personally for quite many months, obviously.
But yeah, so this was the first, this is what I sort of sketched, doodled on the phone while I was talking to Susie, and I kept it because I thought, I kept it accidentally, actually. A few months later, I was cleaning my desk and found a scrap of paper in there, and I thought, I should keep that because it's was a sort of a timely moment. But essentially, what I was sort of sketching there, and immediately the idea that Susie had, like she said, was about bringing people into it. Sort of like Susie, in my career, lots of my work has been about taking sort of complicated issues or complicated conversations and trying as much as I can to sort of boil them down to a way that's understandable and sort of approachable for people. And often that is my approach, is to try and make it clear how what we're talking about matters to a reader. And Susie had suggested that we add some sort of characters to this graph that sort of personify both of the two approaches, that I think can make it understandable why this matters to us, not just what it is, but why it's important. So yeah, 9th of March, we put this out.
Released the beast.
Yeah, which I think is probably, I think it was the next morning after we had chatted or something, we sort of rattled it together really quickly. And there was such a sense of urgency at that time. I think there was a really kind of, I felt a real sense of sort of duty or something and quite happy to be able to help in some kind of way. So I was definitely kind of jumped on it and sort of dropped everything else and just worked on this.
I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that you changed.
Yeah. So obviously at the bottom of it is the two characters that sort of personify those two approaches. I thought the other thing, I mean, lots of what I've learned about communicating stuff clearly is just sort of eliminating any little obstacles that people have to understanding something. If there's a couple of seconds and sort of people's thinking that you can save. So it seems it's really obvious, that little hospital with the full on it, but maybe that helps somebody understand the idea of what healthcare system capacity means just that extra little bit quicker. The other thing that I changed was the colours. In the original one, you remember they're red and blue. To me, I've done enough sort of like political cartooning that I know that red and blue can be really loaded in terms of like, and it's like I want to avoid suggesting one's one and one's the other. So that's how you end up with these delightful colours that are slightly odd. But then I realised I can't use green and I can't use whatever else. So we ended up with these quite odd colours. The other little challenge which we got a few people sort of like asked us about was how I came to have that a man and a woman representing the various approaches, and that was really, we were just working so quickly that I was like, I don't think it's right for it to be 2 men, I don't think it's right for it to be 2 women, and this seems like the way around that's going to be least, cause the least amount of trouble, to be honest.
We still got a bit of flack, but
yeah.
Although my experience of the internet has very much been like this. Anyway. So we released it so as part of a piece that I'd written on the Spinoff, and then onto the internet just through Twitter and Facebook. We always accompanied them with the here's the quick thing. If you want more details, here is the thing, and it's got references or links to the people who we're drawing this from and stuff like that. And it went a bit doolally. It was, I guess, the idea of flatten the curve was the big thing that everyone was talking about, and so very quickly it sort of racked up 6 million impressions. It was just quite crazy. There's a few things we realised. So there ended up being a few iterations of this. First, that we had not put the Creative Commons on, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But we had also missed off somebody. Somebody else then tweeted going, oh, actually, this person was also involved in it, in the creation of that idea. So every time we got some feedback, we put things on. I mean, it's really important to me that we credited people correctly, and so often that gets lost, and that's also why the original things we'd seen hadn't correctly credited who had been involved in everything. And again, so that one didn't go quite as well as the other one, but still 3 million impressions. But yeah, I want to quickly talk. So really important to me very early, well, as we were writing it, or I let Toby get to a fairly complete version, and then I was like, so I've got this question about Creative Commons. Would you agree to releasing it under a Creative Commons license? And I knew this was a big ask of someone who is a creative who might not be used to it. Do you want to?
Yeah, and to be honest, it was something that I knew basically what it meant, but not something that I'd ever sort of considered in my own work. Like as someone making sort of creative work and especially publishing books and stuff, it's really sort of ingrained that idea of protecting your work and being really careful about that. So it's quite a sort of an attitude shift for me to think about doing a Creative Commons thing. But ultimately, the purpose of this work, which I think Susie had explained to me really clearly, was that we want to get this out to as many people as possible. That's the main thing. We're not trying to, this isn't.
It's not about us.
It's not about us, basically. Yeah.
It was about the message.
Yeah. Just getting that out to as many people as possible. So essentially, it meant that people can republish. They can use it. They can even modify it, but as long as the credits stay on it, essentially.
Yeah, and it's been also quite interesting. Actually, we've broken this ourselves, but that we now get lots of messages on Twitter, people seeing our stuff adapted by others that doesn't keep our credit, which by the license they should do. So it's kind of been interesting to see how upset everybody else gets on our behalf who understands Creative Commons licenses. So we have it's a CC BY share alike. So it should have the same license and it should have it should keep our credits. So loads of people have broken that. But also, I mean, that's the good thing about putting them under these licenses is obviously that Toby and I have been able to adapt them for other things, and they haven't had the same license on them, I've noticed, I think.
Yes, yeah, we should, yeah.
So it's... So we've all broken it. But I was just really grateful that Toby agreed, and it's been amazing to see them. Amazing, but also horrifying to see them, some of the adaptations. But also really quickly they started being picked up by the Wikipedia community and being translated into multiple languages. There was a guy who set up some kind of program that once a new graphic came out, he would automatically load it up, and then you just had to type your language and then it would translate everything, which was amazing. And then they were just putting them up on Wikipedia, which is
it's quite an experience to be being tagged in all these Japanese version or a Portuguese version or whatever. Interesting experience.
Yeah, and so it went a bit mad. We ended up being the version that ended up being put on all sorts of things as everyone was talking about this. And then our moment of glory when the Prime Minister held up our chart. it was actually, this horrified me because it was the wrong chart, and I will talk about that in a minute. But what was really, so we then started getting like people wanting to interview us, various things, and we ended up doing something for that got written up for this design website. And what was really interesting was this, so this guy approached us, and he's a design person, and he said that he was seeing this shared by everyone. It was being shared by medical people, it was being shared by design people, it was being shared by kind of members of the general public. And there was something about the way that we had taken that idea, that initial graph, and modified it, that had lifted it above the versions before. So I feel like that was like, yes, that was exactly what we were trying to do. Awesome. But yeah, it was sort of interesting. That was the first time we got to sort of tell our story together. But it was the wrong graph. So the idea behind Flatten the Curve, right, is that you slow down infections to stop overwhelming your health system. Almost immediately after we'd released this beast, I was like, oh, geez, but it still means that you allow people to get infected, which is not what we want, right? We actually want to stop it altogether. So we very quickly, so just a few days later, we were working on this alternative version, which is basically the elimination message, but we didn't call it that, we called it Stop the Spread. And so we then, shifted the just flatten the curve to being you want to stop it altogether. We then changed to this being like a collective response, but also showed that if you didn't keep up that collective response till the virus was gone, then you would see these waves. And it was based on a Lancet article by a bunch of really eminent epidemiologists. I even sent it to them saying, if you want to spread your paper in a little more easy way, here you go, but never heard of them. And this is the one that I had... this is the one that I had hoped the Prime Minister would show, because I had tried to get it sent to her. Unfortunately, she held up the other one instead. But yeah, it was just a few days later then that the government changed their message from flatten the curve to elimination, because Michael Baker had been talking about it and everything as well. But this is the one that I had wished had gone viral, and we missed it by 5 days.
Yeah. I guess it's also interesting to note there, I guess, through this whole process, what's been interesting to me working with Susie has been the information was changing so fast, and we were sort of evolving what we were saying, that we were putting out lots of different things. Lots of the pieces that we did, we had lots of iterations of, and we'd get feedback from people, and it's been really interesting working on something for me that's sort of this evolving, trying to tell the story as you're figuring out the information was.
Yeah, and I'd like us at some point, once the dust has settled a little, to go back and start modifying some of them now that we know that the message isn't quite correct, because they're still all being shared and they're out there and stuff. Like, for example, with this one, we would start adding masks to people and things, because at that stage we weren't wearing masks. Talk about this one. This was our big viral success.
Yeah. This one, this is out of all of them, personally for me, this is one that I'm probably the most proud of, I think. The challenge, I think, is always to boil things down to the simplest form, and I think this is probably one of the ones where we did that the most successfully. I think also using sort of the visuals to do lots of the storytelling, rather than just writing it all out and having the visuals be a sort of an accompaniment or a sort of decorative thing, is always the challenge. And I think in this one we managed to do that quite well.
So what we were trying to show obviously was the exponential spread and what that looks like, and what transmission chains look like, and how you can not be part of a transmission chain if you act. That was a real thing that we wanted people to see, was that it was in all of our powers to not be part of a transmission chain. It was about the decisions that we made. And yes, government were making decisions, but they were also down to all of us. That was what was really, really important to me.
Yeah. One
of the really funny things after this was released was somebody got in touch saying, do you realise the virus is pink? Was that a deliberate thing? I was like, no idea.
Yeah, it wasn't a conscious thing, possibly a subconscious thing. But yeah, and a few times earlier on when I was drawing sort of representations of the virus, my thinking was really just that it had to be a kind of a bright, bold kind colour. Again, with the sort of the values that are loaded onto lots of different colours. You know, like this, if it was green, it looks like it's slime, or there's lots of other reasons that I didn't go with lots of other colours. But yeah, I can't believe, and I'll put it down to not hanging out Susie in person, that we were calling each other up and on Zoom a lot. That I didn't even occur to me, the pink connection.
I'm secretly quite pleased. So do you want to talk about some of the adaptations?
So this one really took off as well in a way that lots of people shared the original one that was used in lots of articles around the world. Again, with that Creative Commons thing, people could embed it into an article, and people did so. But then what was really interesting was that lots of the other sort of government public health campaigns picked it up and adapted it into their own sort of the look and feel of their own campaigns that they were running. You know, in New Zealand we have the Unite Against COVID-19 campaign, the equivalent of that in all these other countries. Took it and sort of did their version of it, which I found quite enjoyable, because for me as a designer, I found it really interesting to see how what these ones look like, and in some ways I think they personified the countries. Like the German one you can see there is very like sort of orderly and organised and serious. And that was an interesting experience too in terms of that crediting thing, where some of the countries left our names on it, some of them didn't. But again, it's one of those ones that I feel like, for me anyway, it was like, we had lots of people contacting us saying, do you realise the Australian government's stolen your thing? And, you know, do you want to kick up a big fuss about it? But I mean, and it's frustrating that they didn't credit it. But I think ultimately for us, it was just great that the message is getting out there. And if it's helpful, that's makes it worthwhile.
So we also did get contacted by people who were explicitly asking permission to adapt it. And quite early on, I got an email from somebody who's at a university in the US, who had been tasked with putting together some teaching materials for use in the youth justice system in the US. And so I was like, yes, of course, feel free to use them, whatever. And then several months later, she emailed me back saying, here for your records is everything we did. And it gives me goosebumps thinking about this. But this is what she did. And so she was trying to use this to, what makes me really sad is that this was necessary, right? So this is all about how do you stop young people in the US getting COVID-19. And it's things like, giving them a verbal warning rather than arresting them and stuff. And so that's just so confronting that this was necessary, but also, I guess, great that our work was able to be adapted in a way that was useful for that. And we've had many, it's been used in many ways. So lots of our work has been used in sort of by refugee councils, all sorts of things. And so it just makes me feel like a bit overwhelmed, actually, that what we've done has been useful in that way. So we've got 10 minutes. So a few more that we did. We were trying to, so as we were moving into our alert level 4, we were trying to, we were going to write some things about, so what do we do? And at that stage, everyone was talking about households and how you stayed in your household. So I was writing a piece, and Toby was starting to put together some graphics for it. And then we watched the media stand up, and the Prime Minister mentioned bubbles. And I was like, immediately, she said bubbles, she said bubbles.
We've been trying to think, like an hour before, we'd have been on the phone trying to think about what's a phrase that you can sum up this idea of. We're thinking about like household units, or like in your house group or whatever, and then bubbles was like a genius way to sum it up, which
turned out to have we found out afterwards, come from a group of academics at Otago who had been putting some frameworks together around for disabled communities and stuff. And so that's so actually we should put their names on there too. Actually, we should, when we reissue these. We've also had some a request at some point to redo some of them to make the bubbles represent other families, so especially Māori and Pacifica families, which have quite extensive bubbles and stuff. So again, when time permits, we may well do that. This one's one of my favourites as a scientist. So this came about because there started to be a lot of confusion about what the word eliminate meant. And I felt some of it came a little bit from the journalists, and I felt like you've not been listening, because the government have been very clear what this word means. But anyway, so we ended up picking a few words that are different between scientists or academia and common usage, and then putting them together. So I really love this one. I love this one especially, a model. So that is Te Puna Hamatatini's model for modelling our outbreak. So it's like it has real science in it too.
A little extra for experts.
Yeah. And that's also been kind of important for me as a scientist, is how can we be, how can we be as scientifically accurate as we can, but so that the geeks will get it.
Yeah, but also be useful to the general public as well.
Yeah, so that one I really liked.
Yeah. Yeah, this one was one that we did fairly early on, and that's probably an example of sometimes it was about, sometimes it's explaining sort of scientific methods, sometimes it's about sort of capturing a mood or capturing something that's sort of setting a tone.
Did I tell you how this one actually started?
I don't know.
So I got an email from Dame Anne Salmon saying, I am sick of... So this must have been before we were going into lockdown, I guess. This must have been
this is like the second or maybe the third or fourth one that we did.
Yeah, so this was before we were moving up. We had alert levels, but we were all being told to keep our distance and various things. And she emailed me going, I'm so fed up of going to have coffee with people and they're trying to hug me. She's like, can you and Toby do something that shows different ways? And I must forward you that email.
Right, I didn't know.
And so I was like, it's a great idea. And then we had some discussion about what ones. The first iteration had the lady up at the top blowing a kiss. And then we were like, oh, no,
Actually,
that's probably not a good idea. So that one quickly adapted. But I love this. It just, again, it was the kind of practical things that will make people think and stuff. And again,
everything is changing so fast that if we could help to kind of, condense down that message or make it understandable, would be helpful to people.
So I won't let this one play all the way through, but we've done kind of serious ones as well that are sort of educational. So this one is all about the different strategies for making a vaccine. Just trying to say, this is what it is. We're not hiding anything. We put up what are the different vaccine candidates that you might start hearing about. Again, this one we maybe could even update now that we actually have ones that are approved and stuff. But also, these are the vaccines you might be familiar with already. This is what they are, kind of thing. I think one of my favourite ones is the Swiss cheese, which I've just had an email about from somebody to say that the name, the Swiss cheese, comes from someone else.
Okay.
Not Reason. He never called it that.
Okay,
so
right.
we might have another name to add now to our thing. But this is the idea that everything we do, every barrier we put in the way of the virus has some inherent flaws in it. And so it's by layering up these barriers, these interventions, that you minimize the chance of the virus making it through our borders. And so I like how we did various versions of this. We did like a New Zealand version. This is how our response has changed over time. We did a version that was like, these are all the responses, and different governments are using different slices, and it's kind of up to every country to try and figure out which slices work for them, type thing. So we've tried to be non-judgmental about what different countries. I mean, I have serious judgment about some countries, obviously, and I'm happy to write that. But we've tried to make our graphics just so that also people can see what they can do, especially in those countries where their governments are not helping. So everything is up on almost everything is up on a box set. We've just released our latest one today, which is about transmission. So it's a Transmission 101, explaining how the virus transmits, all the different routes, trying to get out there the airborne thing, which is one of the big things that's changed around this virus, the idea that it's not just droplets, it's actually in the air, which is a bit freaky. But in our last few minutes, I think we'll let Toby take over from...
And then, for me particularly, I mean, Susie's been involved as well, but it's taken up the bulk of my time over the last few months, as that sort of towards the tail end, as things were we were moving out of level 4 here, and things were feeling like we were relatively on top of things. Obviously, wasn't other places in the world, and Spinoff got contacted by the World Health Organization, whether we could do a similar type of work for them through their social media channels and on their website. As an organisation, I think they were in quite an interesting place where they had never really been asked to speak to the public before. They're sort of an organisation that has been existed to mainly speak to other governments or speak to health departments in different countries, but all of a sudden they were sort of finding themselves where the public was turning to them and saying, what are we supposed to do? So, they had seen the stuff that Susie and I had done, so they came to us and said, can we do some work with you as well? And initially, the story goes that my boss, Duncan Grieve, who's the founder of the Spinoff, thought that it was spam when he first got the email from the World Health Organization. And a little while later, he was like, I should just check. And he Googled the name on the comms director or whatever of the World Health Organization. It was the real person. So some of that work, as you can see here, has been adapting some of the bits that Susie and I have already done. You can see on the left there's a sort of a global version of that. Of the handshakes and greetings. Some of them we had to change. The sort of East Coast wave didn't necessarily translate to the world, and we tried to do a more universal sign language sign. We had an NZSL sign language sign on the original one, but essentially it's the same idea. And that one, they've used that a lot. You can see it's got 55 million views on Facebook, which is quite surreal, really. And then in other parts, they've asked us to write articles in a similar kind of way. And then that one there is an example of one where we've taken that earlier graphic that we've done and adapted it to be about misinformation. That was, adapting one that Susie and I had done.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've kind of enjoyed about this process is that Toby, so I will be thinking this has been my role, I think, throughout the whole thing, has been, what do people need to know? What are people going to need to know in about a week's time? What are the things that, how is the conversation changing? What are we learning? And so thinking, right, okay, let's move on to this, let's tackle this. And so we continue to do that. That's why the transmission one was like, we need to get this out there, that will help. But I've also been thinking, what might the WHO need? And so it's been really cool for us to say, right, we're going to work on this, and then you can pitch this so with the vaccines, with all these kinds of things, we can do some of the work and the thinking, and then basically say, and there are these ones, how do you feel about this? And
that's been sort of how it's working recently. Is we're doing a New Zealand version of something, and then I'll
adapt
through Spinoff, send it off to WHO and say, would you like us to do a global version of this? And lots of the time they've been using that.
Yeah, which is so really cool. So there's and then there's obviously there's ones that Toby did before, but I love the know your risk, lower your risk. So that was one that came where we I was trying to get people to understand that not every There's this idea of the disease triangle, where it's not just about the virus, it's about how the virus interacts with the host and how that interaction also interacts with the environment. So the pandemic is playing out in really different ways in different communities, in different places, because of all these three different things. And so we actually spent a long time working on this. It kind of came on and off the boiler a bit as we were trying to figure out. It ended up being like a slot machine where we could roll through different options. So it could be like, here's a virus. Actually, now we can start changing the virus one to different, because we had the virus basically staying the same, because at that stage it was more or less the same. Now, obviously, we have these more transmissible variants, but we have the virus, we have the host, so that could be, is this a young person, is this an old person? We have the environment. Are you in a country that is doing nothing? Are you, is a healthcare system full, or are you at a wedding? And show how those things, when you roll those different things, you can get a different outcome. And then that's where the risk thing came. Well, this will be like, so, are you likely to get infected? We're good. We're really good. What's that kind of looking like? And so it was really awesome then to see that.
Yeah, we've been using that really good line and that sort of device of that dial for lots of the World Health Organization stuff recently, especially because they're in a sort of a situation where they can't also say, like, you will be safe if you do this, and you won't be safe if you don't do this. So for them to be able to, that's a way that we've come up with, to be able to say it'll be safer if you do this, it'll be less safe if you do this, has been a useful kind of device.
And I think also with the way the WHO timelines work, it's quite nice for us to have the time to work through some of the ideas before we can then pitch them more or less.
With this work, like at the Spinoff, we've now built a bit more of a team. Like the stuff that Susie and I have done together has really just been the two of us and help from our editors at Spinoff. But with this work now, I've got a young illustrator helping me out with stuff, and animators and other people that are involved in the sort of the client, going back and forth with the WHO, the sort of communication stuff. Some of it, like here, has been writing articles. Some of it's been, lots of stuff recently has been about educating about the vaccine, why vaccines work and how vaccines work. And yeah, some of it has been about managing risk for people in countries that are still people have got big decisions to make about how they live their life.
I think as a scientist, the post that I wrote about what the different vaccines were, like what are the different approaches, the Spinoff then took that and kind of rejigged it around and then put that as this could be the potential page on the WHO site. And apparently the WHO came back and said, can you make it a little bit more lay? And so they came back to me going, Susie, can you just rewrite these bits? And so basically the piece that I've written is the piece that is on the WHO site about how the different vaccines work. And it kind of blows me away a little bit. It's like, wow. Yeah. Especially some of the shit that I've had about science communication in the past. It's like, take that, bastards. Anyway, so Toby was a bit sneaky, because what I wanted up on here was actually that what I'm really proud of is that the Spinoff entered us in the Design Awards in the public good category. And we won, which is amazing. So I said to Toby, put in the picture, because I was away. I was like, put in the picture of the pins, because you get it's called the purple pin is the big prize, and it's like a giant drawing pin that if you drop on your foot, you like maim yourself. Anyway, so instead he's got the picture of him getting the pins, and then he snuck in the picture of me. But
also winning awards.
But I think what I wanted to end with was that it is what this has been the most fulfilling, productive, but fulfilling collaboration of my entire working career. And as a scientist, I've had lots of collaborations. And I think what it really shows is for both of us, I feel like it's taken our qualities or the things that we're good at, and it's just lifted them and made something completely different, and sort of it's like more than the sum of its parts, and it really has been a team thing. So both our work, but it kind of encapsulates, I think, how you get through disasters like this, right? You do it as a team, and so my fellow teammate, thank you very much for your I'm so glad he said yes. And I don't think either of us could have imagined that whatever it is almost a year later we would be here, both here for New Zealand but also with the WHO and with everything. So with that, I think thank you for your attention, and we do have a few minutes because I set my timer quite short, so we do have time for questions if you have any questions for us. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Microphones for people to ask their questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm sure there are some questions out. Oh, yeah. Fantastic.
Hi, thank you so much for that. Earlier in the talk, you mentioned that you were in a position to get a lot of reactions directly from the general public on the platforms that you were putting the material up on. Yep. And I was really interested as an information professional, did you take away any major insights, kind of having seen this in bulk from lots of people, whereas some of us might see one thing here or one thing here from people, but you saw the big picture. Did you come away with any insights about how people came to the opposite conclusion from you, or had completely different takes, and where that was coming from?
Oh, actually, one hilarious one, which has come up a few times, has been people wanting to see the data behind the flatten the curve. So how did you work out those areas and stuff? And trying to explain, no, this is a concept. There is no, I can't give you the data set that gave those two things. And so there's been a few people who were like, are they really the same area under each curve and stuff?
Likewise with that sort of spread one, people saying like, oh no, but R is
Yeah.
more like people taking stuff, there's a sort of category of people that take things super literally and try and be sort of pedants about it.
Yeah, they're quite small though.
Yeah. I mean, for the most part, I think on a sort of a positive level, I think what we see often and what I feel like we're sort of aiming for a little bit is people forwarding things on and saying like to a friend or to a family member or whatever and saying, see, this is this thing that I was trying to explain last night at dinner, that you can, if you're sort of encapsulating a thing that's hard to explain. In terms of the negative stuff, there's certainly people that, I mean, it's just doing stuff online. There's always going to be people that disagree with you. I'm not sure if I've got any great insights, I've got to say on how that works necessarily.
Yeah. I think it's, so there's the people who don't believe there's a pandemic, who are just like, oh, more misinformation or more fake news from you guys, kind of thing. There's the pedants, who can be useful.
There's definitely times that we've made corrections to things where, like doctors, there was one that we did early on that was like a symptoms chart that we'd based on something that the WHO had put out, and it had a whole bunch of symptoms and it had rarely or sometimes or never or whatever based on the thing. And we had lots of doctors getting in touch saying, like for example, the first version of that we didn't have anything about smell on it, but it became, as time went on, people became like, no, the smell has been a recurring thing, so we did a new version. So sometimes there's people that get in touch with corrections and
we're always grateful for those.
Yeah.
It's the unhelpful ones, like, show me your data, when it's just like, no, this is just a concept. And if you read the accompanying piece, you would see all the references and blah blah blah. Anyway, so those are, as a woman on the internet, I get that a lot anyway. So regardless of, but I think that's probably
the other thing that I would say for me personally, just more broadly, like in all the work that I've done, like all of the stuff that I do usually lives online, and lots of what I work is sort of contentious issues, political issues or social issues, and I feel like there's always going to be somebody that disagrees when you're writing about political stuff, particularly. This, if nobody disagrees, then it was probably like a fairly soft kind of thing, like it's, to me, I try to assume that there's going to be somebody out there. There's always sort of contrarians that are going to be against it. So
I think on the plus side though, the what's been really clear from the feedback that we've had is that people have understood, the vast majority of people have understood the message that we were trying to get out there, and that people have seen how they can help. Like the things have given them really clear, where things are like almost like instructions, I guess, when things were around, this is what our alert levels mean, these are our bubbles. People have been like, oh, I get it now, and I will change my behavior. And that's like, when? Because that's kind of what we needed. We wanted people to feel empowered. We didn't want people to feel like everything was taken out of their hands, that there were still individual things that we could do. And I feel that people really got that. So that was great.
Hi. I hope, like the National Library is archiving all your work, so we, when this is all a distant memory, we can look back and see the evolution of all the messages. I've got a sort of observation, and it's almost a follow-up to that question. So you've reached this amazing audience online, and I made the mistake of listening to a magic talk this morning. And
don't do that!
Yeah.
Oh!
So on the AM show, more hard news, and they were saying, when are we going to get these vaccines? And, when will all of New Zealand be able to be vaccinated? And yep, fair enough. And then the ad came on, and Peter Williams was saying how he would not be vaccinated. So it was very interesting. And how do you reach that audience? And, where's the responsibility? Also, it's such a schizophrenic 30 seconds of radio.
So, full disclosure, I was supposed to go on the AM show this morning. And yesterday I was like, I just can't face it. So I said I'd made other plans. Jeez. It's hard, right? And it's hard because there are people, like Duncan Garner acts quite differently when the cameras are not on. Like there are really clearly people, Ryan Bridges is the same, you know, there are really clearly people who have a public persona and their personal staff. And their public persona is clicks, it's fake information, it's riling people up. And it's not, I mean, this is where it gets us. It gets us Nazis overrunning the capital, right? That's where it ends up, and no place is immune from that. We are not immune from that in New Zealand. We have, you know, a terrorist attack on mosques in Christchurch, right? So there has to be a reckoning where people are made responsible for the disinformation they share. And that requires all of us to hold them accountable. I don't know how we do that. And they've asked me to go on next week, so I wonder whether I'll call them out on live on air. I'll probably quite quickly.
We did one of the graphics that we did. We spoke to a woman in the US who had done lots of writing about how to talk in a sort of a one-on-one level with like a family member or something who's sharing disinformation or gone down a kind of conspiracy rabbit hole or whatever. And I don't know if that approach is sort of applicable on a wider scale as well. But what we got out of that and the graphic that we made about that was essentially to explain it really quickly was. Not being sort of judgmental and argumentative, like not being super defensive, trying to find shared values between you and them. Oh, I can see you're worried about your children, or I can see, you know, I'm worried about that too. And then, yeah, not fighting with them necessarily, but sort of providing clear information. And I think that generally that's been our approach has been not necessarily to. I know for me, everyone's got different levels of it, and I know there's some people that would say you've got to fight in the trenches every day and sort of scrap with people. But for me, I'm a sort of conflict averse kind of person. I don't feel like I need to get into an argument with everybody every day. But what I would think for me is more effective is just to put out clear information that's that hopefully can counter that.
Yeah, and it's really, you know, it's really clear that there will be people, like if we take vaccines for example, you know, there are people in communities that have had terrible interactions with the state or with healthcare workers, and that will be why they are vaccine hesitant, and that is completely understandable. And so we tackle that by interacting with the people they trust, right? But that is a completely separate category to people like the hosts of the AM show who just shouldn't be given a platform. And this whole idea that deplatforming people is bad, that's bullshit. Actually, the people who are allowed to get up there and spread shit and bollocks is what's wrong, right? Because they are stoking that fear. But how we call them out is hard, and and ends up with people like me getting kind of, you know, really nasty stuff because we're sort of held up as you know, when people and I think maybe this is not what they don't understand, and maybe I need to make a personal appeal, is that when they stoke that stuff, it actually ends up in real harm caused to people, including me. You know, I'm seen as kind of a shill for the government and all this kind of stuff, and that ends up with, for example, I was just on the phone this morning to NetSafe because somebody released my home address on the internet on a far right platform over the weekend, and they've got it taken down. That's all great. The police are involved, but you know, I've had threats. I've had threats on email and that's what it does. You know, there are people who think I'm a Satanist. It's like I'm an atheist. I don't even believe in either of them, right? But you know, this is what that stokes. It gets those people who are frightened, and it just whizzes them into a hysteria, and then they do dangerous stuff sometimes. And I think that the hosts themselves, or the people on those platforms who stoke that, kind of hold themselves out as like, well, you know, we're like doing our job. I don't know. It's a really crap job if that's your job then. So, but yeah, I'm all open to ideas for how we can tackle this. But it requires a collective response rather than me, maybe. There's a question down here. Do you still have your question? Yeah, sure.
Hi, Susie. I'm Jo from Auckland as well. I had a question. You guys have had to work really fast-paced in a really changing environment and be responsive to the changing information that's coming your way. And it's cool that you're going back and changing all the messages that you want to add things to as you go. But looking back at the comms you've had to do to reaching out to people, are there things that you would have approached a different way, looking back at it now, or other ways or venues that you would have tried to do things, looking back and having thinking about that? Or you may not have had a chance to worry about that because you've got so much going on at the moment, but...
I think putting a date on stuff now is really important. The one that we've released this morning is about transmission. It's kind of like, well, here's what we sort of know, but actually this is probably all going to change with the new variants. So we've got a little asterisk that just says, this may change with these new variants evolve, right? So whether we do anything differently?
Yeah, apart from some, I mean, there's little details in some of them that it's, as we've pointed out, as we've gone. But I think overall in terms of the approach, I don't know, it all happened so fast and was so in the moment that...
Sometimes I'm not even sure I can remember some of it, to be honest. It was just so, we weren't sleeping really much, we were just up, working late into the night. I mean, this has had a big toll on our families as well, who had to sort of pick up the slack while we were doing this stuff.
Yeah.
So they might have, they might have suggestions.
Yeah, that's
but
true. My wife would say maybe 10% less work, maybe.
Yeah, but it just felt like we could contribute, and so we should contribute, and so we did.
Yeah, we're lucky that we were able to help in a way. Yeah.
Hi there. Do you brainstorm together, or is one of you more thinking of the ideas, or like, where did the cheese come from? That's amazing.
Yeah.
So I guess it's been different for everyone, right? So I am obviously trying to keep on top of what is happening both in the literature, in the science, in the discussions that are happening globally. So I am connected into researchers all around the world and stuff. And so there are things where it's like, that's an awesome idea. We should totally make one of that. Or I see this being like, for us, vaccines are going to be the big thing. So like, how can we start to think about vaccines and stuff? So there's, or I've just read a paper. This is awesome. We should totally make something out of this, right? But then and it's been different. Some of them I've had a really clear, like, I would like a graphic of this, please. And then other stuff, it's been like, here is some blurbs I've written. Could you turn this into something graphical?
Yeah, but quite different each time, yeah. Sometimes it's been us on the phone chatting back and forth. Sometimes, like Susie will send me some notes of like, here's some topics that I was thinking about, these would be good to do. And if something jumps out at me, that seems like I've got an idea of a way to visually express it. But it really has been different every time. Lots of emails back and forth, basically. Zoom sometimes, on the phone sometimes. But yeah, like Susie says, we didn't actually meet in person until
June or July or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.